So what we're going to talk about today is giving you a framework for understanding monetization and pricing. And in addition to that, making sure we can give you some good strategic pieces as well as some good tactical pieces. Now, who in the world am I to even talk about this? So as was mentioned, my name is Patrick Campbell. I'm the founder CEO of a company called ProfitWell. We started about 7 years ago in Boston, and my personal background's in econometrics and math. I started my career, worked in US intelligence in DC. Then I worked at Google and basically was building value models to take a bunch of data and get some sort of output. So when I worked at NSA, using data to basically find bad guys and bad gals. When I worked at Google, using those data models to basically find money. Interestingly enough, the same exact models, very different types of outcomes. And then 7 years ago, started ProfitWell, and we focus on what we like to call the hard parts of subscription growth. So essentially, we take a ton of data, and we basically try to find you ways to increase your ARPU through better pricing, decrease your churn through attacking kind of the mechanical pieces of churn, and ultimately understanding where and when you're having issues within your business. To date, we have about 20% of the entire subscription market using one or more of our products because we use a freemium strategy with our analytics products. And then we have customers all over the world just awkwardly looking around to see if we have the slides, because I'm running out of shtick here. All right. So in terms of pricing, what a lot of people don't understand is that pricing is one of those things that's more than just the number on the page. So a lot of us, whether we're a subscription business, whether we're a nonprofit, whether we're a retail business, it doesn't matter really what we're doing. What's really interesting about what you're creating is you're creating some sort of value for that particular product. And then you're taking that value, and because we don't trade like goats for wheat anymore, because we're a modern economy, what we then do is we basically ascribe a number to that particular point of value, and then we basically say that this particular value is worth $10. But what's really kind of fascinating about this, no matter the business that you may or may not have, do we have slides coming or no? Okay.
Can I get, yeah, awesome. So Patrick, sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay.
This is just, just because you mentioned this is your nightmare, the last thing I want you to experience is a nightmare on my stage.
Oh, that's okay.
So I have two options here. So you either keep talking and then you give me and then you kind of let me in when we want to jump into Q&A, or we sit down and we have a chat.
We can do Q&A.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Why don't we sit down and let me just go through a couple of fun pieces. Yes, and then we can get to some Q&A.
Come on,
cool?
This is going to work out.
Totally, this is going to be great. So, essentially, woo! Let's go fire it up. All right. You guys are very vocal for Germans. I heard Germans were not as vocal as you guys are. I like it. It's awesome. So basically, what we're doing with pricing is we're taking some sort of value, we're ascribing some sort of number to it. But what's fascinating, especially in some sort of like recurring revenue business, is that your price is more than just the number. It has to do with which type of customer that you're targeting. It has to do with what type of product or packaging that you're offering. And then ultimately it has to do with the actual number that you're actually going to charge for that particular product. And what's kind of fascinating is the market has changed pretty dramatically. So it used to be that you only had one particular store, one particular vendor out there for the products that you were going after. And then all of a sudden, with the birth of the cloud, the birth of Stripe, the birth of all these different products, it made it really, really easy for us to basically build products very, very quickly. So if you think about it today, all of us in this room, we could essentially start up a new server, get a new website, start driving traffic to that website, and basically start a company by the end of the day today. Probably wouldn't be that great of a company, but it would be one of those things where we could essentially get started, which was the biggest barrier to entry. And what that's meant is, just to give you some data points here, and I have some nice fancy slides for this, but don't worry about it. Competitors are up basically 6x over the past 5 years. So the average number of competitors you used to expect basically in your first year of business about 6-7 years ago was about 2. Now the average number of competitors you can expect is right around 12 to 13. And what that means is customer acquisition cost is up substantially. So a customer that you might have acquired, let's say, for 100 euros maybe 5-6 years ago, that customer is now costing about 170 euros today, because we have all these channels that have opened up over time, but now we're losing them as they open up because they get very, very dense. And because of all this product, what's essentially happened is that value has been lost pretty substantially. So software or technology has just kind of lost its allure. So software is now worth probably about 30% of what it once was, because it used to be you could put a really, really nice UI on a database and you were basically a god. But today, all of a sudden, it's like if it doesn't have good design, doesn't have good UI, no one's going to look at it, right? And we see that in NPS scores as well, which is a measure of customer satisfaction. Those are actually down from an average of about 34 across about 1,800 companies, down to an average of about 10. And so in this kind of context, what can you do when it comes to pricing? Well, there's 3 big things, and then I'll sit down, and we can kind of go through anything that you want from your heart's desire here. 3 really, really big things to think about. First thing is take pricing seriously. Anyone have a guess as to the average percentage? We have slides.
We have them on. Okay.
Magical.
Okay, Patrick, now you need to make a polite decision here. Do you want me to get off stage, or do you want me to stay?
You can stay as long as you want.
Are you going to join me? Because me sitting here alone looks a bit awkward.
Okay. Give me like 10 minutes.
Absolutely.
And then you can come
we'll be back in 10 minutes.
Cool. All right. So I'm going to skip everything. So we sell a cool product. This is our free product. It's free subscription, financial metrics. There's about 20,000 companies using it. We make money through a myriad of ways. Don't worry about it. It's not important. We've seen inside more recurring revenue data than anyone else out there. This was the whole point about pricing. So everything you're doing in your business is basically driving someone to a point of conversion or justifying the price or the product that you offer them, right? And so when it comes to pricing, oftentimes we just think of that number, when in reality it's who do we actually sell to, what do we sell to them, and how do we position it? And then ultimately the number, which is where we spend probably the majority of our time, even though we probably shouldn't. Now in terms of some of the scary stats that I was giving you here, I believe, there we go. Why is this so important now? I have a really cool picture of a server in a second. There we go. So that's what you had to use back in the day. Some of the old timers in the room, you probably remember this. All of us young folks were probably like, what is this scary looking thing? Someone's Xbox, I don't know. No, but it's something where that's what it took to actually build a business back in the day. Competition is way up. We've lost a lot of our power. CAC is way up. This is the 70% increase in customer acquisition costs. Value is way down. This is about 1 million data points about willingness to pay. And then this is the NPS data that I mentioned. There we go. There we go. And then as I was about to just get to, any guesses as to the percent of our budgets that we typically dedicate to acquiring customers? Any guesses? Just throw a number out. Throw a word out. Give me something. 30%. Well, we did a study for about 1,200 different companies. These were all subscription companies of some sort, some big, some small. We found that the median that was dedicated to acquisition was actually about 57%. And that means that more than half of that base was basically spending more in acquisition, and more than half was, or less than half was basically spending less. But what's kind of fascinating about this, and to kind of drive home why pricing is so important, is that acquisition is now table stakes. And what I mean by that is that you have to be good at acquisition basically just to survive. And we did a model where we basically isolated the 3 big parts of growth: acquisition, monetization, and retention. And we basically wanted to figure out, if we improve each of these by the same relative amount, what was going to be the impact on revenue? So we figured out that if you improve your acquisition by 1%, meaning your net new leads or your conversion volume, you're actually going to see about a 2 to 3% boost in your actual revenue. And that's slowly going down over time because, again, channels are getting denser and denser, and we're just not getting brand new marketing channels every single year anymore. Now, what's fascinating is if you improve your ARPU, your average revenue per user, the measure of pricing, or you improve your retention, your actual churn rate, by the same 1%, and it's harder to get a 1% gain there, but still, you actually can see that there's about a 4 to 8x impact in the bottom line overall. Now, this isn't to say that you're going to spend 57% of your time on monetizing your users and retaining your users, but it is to say that if we really evaluate how much time that we're actually spending on this part of our growth, it's one of those things that you can notice that we're probably not spending enough time there. Now, what's kind of crazy about this is that there's also another implication here. A couple of the previous speakers really talked about making sure you talk to your customers, making sure you understand where your customers get value. But what we've actually found is that we're actually pretty bad at this as entrepreneurs. What we've actually seen is that, man, we're gonna get there, I promise. There we go. We've actually found that what we're building is actually very, very far from value that our customers are actually seeing. And to introduce this model, I basically need to introduce a new model that you haven't seen before to give you the data to kind of support this. But it's a nice little classic 2x2. Any MBAs in the audience? None? I find that so hard to believe. There we go. You guys love 2x2s, don't you? This is really exciting for you, right? But when you think about any product, it doesn't matter if it's a cup of coffee, an enterprise piece of software, it doesn't really matter what it is. You have two axes of value. The first axis of value is the actual features or the attributes of that particular product. So for a cup of coffee, it's things like taste, country of origin, temperature, these types of things. Now what's fascinating is the other axis of value, the one that we typically fixate on, is the actual willingness to pay or the price of that particular product. Now what I can do using some methodologies that I'm probably not going to get to today just for the sake of time here, but that you can do in Excel or you can make much more complicated, is I can survey this entire room, the entire city of Munich, Oktoberfest, a sample of the world, but I can basically go out and I can collect data from target customers, and I can find out that when push comes to shove, when you're comparing these different data points, you really, really care about temperature. You're pretty indifferent about or care about temperature, you really, really care about taste, you're indifferent about temperature, and you don't really care, or it's not the most valued feature when it comes to things like country of origin. I can then use a different model and I can actually ask you some willingness to pay questions, and I can find out that those individuals who really care about taste, they're willing to pay about 30% more. Those who care about temperature, you're willing to pay about 20% less. And then the hipsters in the audience who care about country of origin, you're willing to pay about 40% more. Now, what's cool about this model is that if I find a feature or something about the product that has high value from a relative value perspective compared to the other features, and the people who care about that feature are willing to pay more, I found a differentiable feature. If I find something that has low value relative to the rest of the features, but has high willingness to pay for the people who care about it, that's an add-on. If I find something that's high value relative to the rest of the features, but low willingness to pay, it's a core feature. And then my favorite quadrant is trash, right? Now what's interesting about this is that sometimes you still have to build some trash, right? Because some features like a login screen or in some industries a mobile app, those are just becoming so core and so table stakes that you're not gonna get a lot of value from them, or your users aren't, but they're just absolutely needed. But we went out to about 1,300 product leaders and we basically asked them for their last N features, where do they think that they fell on this map? And this is what they said for just under 5,000 features. We then went out to about 1.2 million different customers of these products, and using some of the methodologies we've developed over the past decade, we basically asked them, where do they actually see value? And this is what they said. And we laugh, but if you ask any luminary of Silicon Valley or any successful company, where should you focus? They oftentimes will boil everything down to focus on the customer, think about the customer, right? But again, if we really think about where we put value and where we're actually building, what we'll find is that a lot of us aren't doing our customer development. And it's not about asking the customer what they want. That's not the questions that you should be asking. It's about understanding where they see value and then building what you think is going to get them that value. And so to bring this back to pricing, I know this is super depressing for multiple reasons. We have to fix it through what's called value-based pricing. Anyone ever hear that before? Anyone ever told you what that actually means? There's a lot of Forbes articles that say price based on value, and then they never actually explain it, right? Well, value-based pricing really comes down to collecting data from your target customer base and then utilizing that data to essentially understand where they see value and comparing that to your costs and your competitors and then making some sort of decision based on all of that information. And the reason this is so important is that oftentimes we end up pricing our products in very, very bad ways, using costs or competitors. And the problem with the two of these is that your customers don't care about your costs, they care about their costs. And in addition to that, most of us are building technology products, so our value relative to our costs is very, very different. The average cost per user for Salesforce is about $12. The actual revenue per user is closer to about $130, right? And now on the competitive side, oftentimes we think this is where we should get our information from. But what you'll notice is that your competitors are basically not doing their homework, and by using competitive-based pricing, you're assuming that your competitor has done their homework. You're actually also assuming that you're selling the exact same type of product to the exact same type of customer, which oftentimes isn't the case. We over-index how competitive our markets actually are, when in reality, we're competing against doing nothing most oftentimes with our customers. And so value-based pricing means collecting some data, similar to the data that we talked about previously, taking that data in the context of our costs and competitors, and then making a pricing decision. So if the value-based data comes back and says, hey, this is worth 100 euros according to the customer, but our costs are 120 euros, and our competitors are pricing at 90 euros, we don't just go down to 80 euros, which is oftentimes more often what we actually do as entrepreneurs. Instead, we figure out, hey, we need to go find a different customer that actually values this product at a higher rate. We need to fix our costs, or we need to basically drop everything and fix everything that we have. Now, a couple of ways to do this. I'm not going to go through all of this. We wrote a book on this that I can send you. I'll share my email at the end here, but just for the sake of time with the issues before, I'm going to make sure that everyone can get that. Now, what we do here is we go into our experimental design, which is basically a fancy word for going out to our market, doing our customer development, and asking our questions of our particular users or our target users. Run those through some basic statistical models. You can make them much more complicated if you want, but what we found is oftentimes the most basic models that you can use are actually the highest ROI in terms of your time and the costs that are involved. You're going to quantify your buyer personas, and then that's going to help you make some strategic pricing decisions. Now, these models break down by really focusing on the customer. And when I talk about buyer personas, I'm not talking about what Grandma HubSpot and Grandpa Marketo have been talking about for the last 10 years. I'm actually talking about really breaking down who you're selling to on a very, very quantifiable level. And that means not only understanding what features and what attributes of the products that they actually care about, but also understanding what they don't care about, then looking at what you estimate or what you actually know as their lifetime value, what you think their willingness to pay looks like, and even the estimate or the actual understanding of what customer acquisition costs look like. And the reason it's so crucial to have something like this inside your business is because this acts as a central way to argue amongst your team about what you should be doing or which direction that you should be going. So for example, if I'm talking to our head of product and we've collected some of this data, or even we haven't collected some data, but we just have this inkling based on our qualitative conversations with our customers that Enterprise Meredith really cares about this one feature, but all of a sudden our head of product wants to build something that's on Startup Steve's map, well then we'll go back and basically say, well, wait a minute, we're building for Meredith, why would we build that for Steve when we know Meredith is our target customer? The other really useful aspect of this, I guarantee you right now, and I've seen enough data to support this, I guarantee you are targeting a customer persona or profile in your business right now that is terrible for you. We've just seen it time and time again where our founder vision or our entrepreneurial vision is like, we're going to democratize this thing across this customer base, right? But then we don't realize that those customers actually cost way too much to acquire and aren't willing to pay for our product. So instead of kind of giving up on them, we just kind of brute force trying to acquire them rather than trying to find a customer who's actually a really, really good target. So I can share a book that goes through these models, all kinds of fun stuff on how to actually collect this. Basically, all these fun graphs that I'm showing you right now that I'm not going to explain. Look at that, fancy graphs. They're great, right? And I know that sounds like work. So I'm going to give you a couple of very tactical pieces here that'll actually make it easier for you to kind of just go implement something inside your business almost immediately when it comes to pricing. So the first tactical piece is using something what's called a value metric. So a value metric is essentially what you charge for. And for some companies, it could be something like per user, it could be 100 visits. For a company like Intercom, this is their old pricing. It was actually the number of users or the people that went through its product. And then one of their competitors, a company called Drift, they actually priced a very, very competitive product basically based on users. And the reason I'm showing you this is because you can have competitive markets where people are using very different value metrics. And the reason that Drift did this is that they were targeting more of a sales user, whereas Intercom was targeting sales, marketing, product, support, a bunch of different types of users. So it's one of those things where it's super, super useful to kind of study your market in terms of what the value metrics are, but don't necessarily listen to them always. But the really, really important piece of why this is so important is because it bakes growth directly into how your customers use your product. So if you think about a per user pricing or per 100 visits, per 1,000 widgets, whatever it is, what's really, really kind of fascinating about it is growth is just so much better for those customers using value metrics, or those companies using value metrics. Here in the light green, you're looking at those companies that they have pure value metric-based pricing. And the dark green are those companies that are using pure feature differentiated pricing. And so you'll notice the growth rates are obviously much, much larger. And the reason for this is one of the previous slides that I don't think we really spent a lot of time on, but it's because that features are basically losing their value pretty considerably. Now, what's also cool about pricing based on a value metric is that your churn rates tend to be much, much lower. So on the far left here, you're looking at feature differentiated companies. Their churn rate's a median of about 7%. On the far right here, these companies are using pure value metric-based pricing. They have about half the churn. And the reason for this is basically because those users might contract in revenue or expand in revenue, but they're not necessarily churning out because they're just using the amount of value that they're actually getting within the actual product. Another really, really big topic here is the concept of price localization, especially for German companies. If you are going into any other region that's out there, obviously you should be doing things like actual language localization. But one of the other big things is making sure that your pricing is actually different for different regions that are out there. And what you're looking at here is basically the growth of ARPU for those companies that are using just cosmetic localization, meaning the only thing that's different about their pricing is basically the currency symbol for the different people coming from different regions. And then on the right here, those folks who are actually using different effective prices in different regions. So the price in the UK might be the equivalent of 100 euros. The price in Germany might be the equivalent of 150 euros. Because different markets have different purchasing parity and essentially different demand bases within their market. And to give you a little bit of data here to kind of support this conclusion, it's about 1.5 million data points, and this is all relative to the United States pricing. But basically what you're seeing here is that sight unseen, if I was selling a product into the Nordics, and obviously you have to check your own vertical and your own product, I basically would price that product at about 25 to 30% higher than my US-based pricing, and similarly about 40 to 35% less for my Southeast Asia pricing, because it's just different regions. Now to wrap this thing up here, one last piece that is super, super tactical, you could leave literally today and fix this inside your business, is optimizing for term. And what I mean by that is not just offering monthly pricing and annual pricing or 2-year pricing, and this is going to be different for each business, but making sure you're actually taking advantage of working more of your customers off pure monthly pricing. And the reason for this is you basically bake good retention or proper retention into your pricing model. And what you'll see here is that essentially those companies that have a higher percentage of their deals being annual contracts essentially have low churn. And it's a very, very strong correlation. And so what we recommend doing is not necessarily forcing annuals, but if you think about it, you're probably not asking those users to upgrade to annual, all but when they actually sign up, which might be the worst time to actually ask them to upgrade. And so it might be something where 3 months in, or basically once a year, just making sure you're actually asking them, hey, you seem to love the product. Do you want to get on our annual plan to save 1 month or 2 months in order to not only save money, but then on your side, actually boost the retention of those particular users? And so with that, some rapid fire pieces. This is all data that I can send you. Don't discount over 20%. What we've noticed is that those users who tend to have a greater than 20% discount, their retention is just terrible. Support brand and design. They actually boost willingness to pay a lot more than they used to. Meaning when we look at their impact on willingness to pay today versus 5-10 years ago, it's actually 20% higher. It's pretty significant. Credit card failures, this is a big thing. In Germany, you don't have this as much, but your international clients will have a lot of problems with credit cards, and so it's one of those things to look at when it comes to your churn. And then one thing to kind of think about is freemium. Freemium kind of ebbs and flows, and how sexy it is. Sometimes people hate it, some people love it. What we're noticing more and more is because of the density of the market, freemium companies and those customers that are coming from freemium tend to have much better customer acquisition costs and also tend to have much, much higher retention. It's not for everybody, but it's something to kind of think about. Cool. Everyone get some value? Fired up? Awesome. So with that, happy to give you free benchmark audits. So if you plug into ProfitWell, we can take a look at your business relative to other benchmarks. But if you want any of the slides, or we have a ton of other resources I can send you, here's my email address. Sometimes it takes a little while to get back, but I always get back to you. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
Come on, let's
Want to sit down?
Yeah.
All right.
Let's sit down. So, thank you.
There's no beer up here. What's going on?
I'm so sorry.
I thought it was Oktoberfest.
Yes, that will actually start tomorrow morning at 9. So if
there
you're
we
wondering if this conference knows how to start drinking early, tomorrow morning. This is how it works.
All right.
So thank you for walking us through and finding the most valuable bits and pieces of your beautiful presentation.
Yeah, no worries.
that we managed to see. So, given the different journeys that you have behind you, in the sense of the choices that you also did for your career, how does it come that you ended up optimizing prices? I mean, of all the things you could optimize.
Yeah. I think it's the kind of non-PR answer is I've always been obsessed with like the who or the why behind data. And when you think about pricing, a lot of people approach it as just Excel engineering different problems and things like that. But in reality, what you're really trying to find is like the who is that customer that you're going after.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of an innate obsession. And then why did I found a company? I think in hindsight, it was like pure hubris, just because when I was in my mid-20s, I was like, I don't want to work for anybody, as an idiot would say. And so I ended up doing that, and then, I had the massive ego check, and then, started the company and kind of went from there.
Okay, awesome. So there's some questions that we could kind of put in context here, besides the credit that you get for your improvisation and dancing skills.
I dance very well. Don't forget
you do.
that.
So, questions come up like, okay, how does this apply to SaaS models? Does it apply to consultancies as well? So if you're more like a service design product, how does this differ? If it's not like I would take the easiest take, like in e-commerce.
So what's interesting is that this is most applicable. Well, there's certain bits here, like the annual upgrade aspect.
Yeah.
If you don't have a recurring revenue business, it's really hard to ask someone for an annual upgrade, right? And so those are things that don't apply. But the functions of what's been happening with costs in the market and the drop in value, that applies to businesses across the board. Even services. And the main reason this is happening is because, as the cliche goes, the world's getting smaller. In addition to that, it's getting easier and easier and faster to build things. And so ultimately, it's one of those things that, that it is very, very applicable. You have to understand your customer better than you used to.
So what do you think? I mean, you used the word hubris yourself just a few seconds ago. So why do you think that is so difficult? Because it should be the most obvious thing for all of us, right?
Yeah.
The customer is going to pay us, so why stop actually thinking about it?
Yeah, so I think if you're starting a company, and it doesn't really matter what type of company you're starting, you've probably been blessed somehow in your life, right? Like we're not digging ditches, we're not.
We all are. We wouldn't sit here if we weren't.
It's one of those things where like we're probably pretty smart if we're in this room, right? Yeah. At least at some level. And so what ends up happening is with pricing, we get really nervous because it's something that is so central inside our business. And then in addition to that, we know that because if we make one change or one upgrade, one downgrade, something like that, it's going to have an impact on the entire business, right?
So it's fear?
So it's what?
Are we just afraid?
It's afraid. It's fear. It's just a confidence gap. We found this out really early on because we started selling software for this, like pure software.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, people were like, this software is great, this data is great, and the answer would be super obvious. But they were like, can you just like come talk to our team? Like they just needed confidence, or at least someone to blame if something went wrong in some cases as well. And so that was a big thing of how we got started. But I think it really comes down to that confidence barrier where you're all smart enough to figure out your pricing. It's just you have to focus on it. And this is why we recommend really basic things like deadlines and decision makers and starting small. If you're trying to attack your entirety of your pricing, you're going to fail. It's just a project that's bound to fail. You have to focus on like little bits, and I would focus on things like localization, or upgrade to annual if you're a subscription business, because those are really simple things that you'll expose other problems inside your business and kind of go from there.
Okay, there is a beautiful twist in the question that popped up, in the sense of, okay, the pricing or working with our own product pricing is such a challenging topic, also because we somehow take it personal, right?
Yeah.
So if we realize customers are actually not willing to pay as much, we might be upset. So the question that popped up was, well, can it be used, or the methodology or some of it thinking, can it be used to reward your employees, or how to balance the way to whom to give what salary and bonuses and so on and so on?
Yeah, I mean, you can. There's other things you have to think about with like salaries and stuff like that. Like the thing is that this isn't all purely quantifiable. So what we found, at least with pricing, is that when you get the data back, there are some things that are super, super obvious that you already knew. There's some things that are super obvious you didn't know. And then ultimately, there's a bunch of different like margins of opportunity. And if you apply this to like employee salaries and things like that, like you have to make sure that you're measuring, how you're rewarding your team members. And one place to start, if you want to start there, and it kills two birds with one stone, as they say, is like actually looking at your sales compensation. So all of a sudden, if you start compensating your sales team based on who had the least discounts, who had the best margins on their deals, those types of things, it actually helps a lot. And that's where you kind of fuse like salaries as well as pricing like in one place.
Okay, so people are asking you about your book. You can get it. You promised on stage, on video, you're going to send it around after someone
just email
emails
me
you.
And I'll send you an electronic version, totally.
Exactly. So what % of annual billing do you see among SMB and SaaS companies? Well, it's a very technical question, but you might still want to answer it.
Yeah, so what % of annual billings do you see among SMB SaaS companies at around 100 to 200 monthly ARPU? Okay, so annual billing, it follows a smile curve based on your ARPU, meaning low ARPU, you want a really, really high percentage of, so like $100 to $200, I think it's close to like 50% of your contracts on annuals. And then it goes down as you get higher, closer to about $1,000 per month in ARPU, and then it starts to go back up because you get into enterprise deals where they force annuals on you, basically. So for $100 and $200, we have this data. If you just email me and make a note, I'll get you, we wrote a blog post on this with the data, but it's basically close to about 50% for that ARPU.
Okay. Thank you. So to close up, I mean, you, as I mentioned in your introduction, also worked for U.S. Defense Department.
Yep.
And
I was not the one who spied on Chancellor Merkel, okay? That was not me. Can't joke about that? That was, okay.
No, you totally can. You can joke about anything.
Obama was here yesterday. You should have talked to him about it.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Yeah.
That's actually true.
Yeah.
So my closing question always has kind of the same twist, is conference is about impact.
Yeah.
So, well, pricing is helping us to grow and be successful as entrepreneurs. And if our business that we run creates a positive impact on society, you're obviously helping us. That's one way to look at it.
Yep.
But is there a more immediate step that you go towards this whole impact discussion as an entrepreneur or as a person?
Yeah, as a human, it's a little bit easier to answer, I think. I think that what's kind of beautiful, so I come from like as we call a blue collar family in the States, where like my dad was like a union sheet metal worker, that type of thing. And so what's interesting is my dad growing up would like piss and moan about management and like the other side, right? Like you guys have a good tradition of that conversation as well here.
Yes.
And what was funny is as I got older and started the company, we would have arguments, like healthy ones, about, hey, like we can do differently as young companies, and we are now the next wave of management, right?
Sure.
And although like I don't know how much that's going to affect, the corporate world, like very large corporates, I think one of the biggest things we can do as entrepreneurs is figure out what's right for your team and what's right for your company. So creating that great place to work, not treating people as, like cogs in a machine. I know that's not like the sexy answer, like solving climate change or these types of things, but it's one of those things where I think that's the biggest impact you can have. And then everything else can kind of stem from there, right? Whether you have a pet project or a pet investment in, fusion or something like that, it can basically stem from there, but I think that's where we can have the highest impact.
Would you ever go back into a State Department?
Frankly, when I worked in the Intel community, it was probably and it's ironic given what I do now, most fulfilling job I've ever had in my life.
Oh.
Because yes, I was there with the pre-Snowden and all that kind of fun stuff, and so there's obviously some very important debates to have about that world and about that environment. But there was no job, when you speak about impact, there was no job that I've ever seen that had more impact than I had there, where you were trying to, like I said before, find a bad guy or find a bad gal, and using data and using things like that to do that. There's obviously, just to be clear, issues in that world that need to be discussed, but I don't think I'd ever go back, mainly because working for the government it's if you're really hungry and you're really ambitious, it's a tough place to work. That's why I left, was because it's a weird world to live in, where you're like, I know I'm not going to get to that next step for 10 years, not because of skill or anything like that, just because it's the government,
of the rules.
right? And so, but yeah, it was a really, really fulfilling job.
Well, thank you for all of your contributions on all ends, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks.